Red wine. Swirl a glass of red and taste that dry grip on your tongue. That's tannin, pulled straight from the grape skins as the wine ferments. Winemakers soak the juice with those skins to draw it out, and time is everything. A few days gives you something soft and easy. A few weeks gives you something that grabs back. It's why a Pinot Noir slips down like silk while a Cabernet Sauvignon coats every corner of your mouth. Same starting point, different patience. And here's the strange part. Crush the darkest black grape without its skin, and the juice runs clear. The red was never in the fruit at all, only in its coat. The wine owes its fame to a wedding. In 1152, Eleanor of Aquitaine married Henry Plantagenet, soon to be King Henry II of England, and just like that, her lands around Bordeaux passed to the English crown. The English couldn't get enough, and for 300 years ships hauled Bordeaux red north by the barrel. But that early wine, called claret, was pale and thin, barely darker than a rosé, rushed through fermentation to keep up with demand. Not until the 1600s did a Bordeaux winemaker named Arnaud de Pontac slow the process down, leave the juice on the skins longer, and age it in fresh oak at Château-Aubryon, transforming claret from cheap, sour export into the deep, lasting red the word still means today. White wine. Pour a cold glass of white, and the first thing you notice is what's missing. No dry grip on your teeth, no heavy weight on your tongue, just crisp, bright fruit and a clean snap of acidity. That lightness is the whole point, and it comes down to one decision made in the first minutes of winemaking. The grapes go straight to the press, and the skins are thrown out before fermentation even starts, so none of the color or tannin locked inside them ever reaches the juice. Here's the twist most people never learn. You can make white wine from black grapes. Crush a dark Pinot Noir and strip the skins away fast enough, and the clear juice inside makes a pale wine, which is exactly what happens in champagne every day. Because whites throw away the skins, they lose the tannin that lets red wine age for decades, so winemakers lean on other tools to build flavor and life. A Riesling from Germany's cool Mosel Valley is picked to keep its razor acidity, giving sharp green apple and citrus notes. A Chardonnay from warm California ripens softer and rounder, and if it's aged in oak barrels, it picks up butter and vanilla from the wood. Same drink, opposite personalities, decided by where the grape grew and what the winemaker did after the press. Rosé. Rosé isn't red wine mixed with white. In most of the world, blending the two to make pink wine is actually banned. The color comes from time. Winemakers crush red grapes and let the juice sit against the skins for just a few hours, long enough to stain it a pale salmon or shell pink before the skins are pulled away. A red wine soaks on its skins for weeks. A rosé gets a brief kiss, and no more. That short contact is why rosé stays light and low in tannin, tasting of fresh strawberry, citrus, and white peach, rather than anything dark or heavy. And despite the sweet fruit smell, most quality rosé is bone dry. That strawberry note comes from the grape itself, not from added sugar. The most famous pink wine in America was born from a mistake. In 1975, California winemaker Bob Trinchero was making a dry pink Zinfandel at Sutter Home when the fermentation stalled. The yeast quit before it had eaten all the sugar, leaving the wine sweet and blush-colored. He bottled it anyway. That accident, White Zinfandel, became the best-selling wine in the United States, shifting millions of cases a year and pulling a whole generation into drinking wine. Serious wine critics mocked it for decades, but it kept the lights on. And it's a different thing entirely from the dry Provençal rosés that later took over summer tables. Sparkling wine. The bubbles in a bottle of champagne come from trapping a second fermentation inside the glass. Winemakers take a finished still wine, add a little sugar and yeast, and seal it up. The yeast eats the sugar and gives off carbon dioxide, but with nowhere to escape, the gas dissolves into the wine under pressure. When you pop the cork, that pressure releases, and the gas rushes out as millions of fine bubbles. A champagne bottle holds around 3 times the pressure of a car tire, which is why the cork leaves with a bang and why the glass is built so thick. The monk Dom Pérignon is famous for supposedly tasting the first champagne and crying, "Come quickly, I am drinking the stars." He said no such thing. The line was invented by an advertising campaign nearly 200 years after he died. The real Pérignon spent his career at the Abbey of Hautevillers, trying to get rid of bubbles, because in his day the gas made bottles explode in the cellar, and the wine was treated as a fault. The method behind proper sparkling wine was actually written down first in England by a scientist named Christopher Murray, who described adding sugar to make wine fizz in a 1662 paper, 6 years before Pérignon ever reached the Abbey. Fortified wine. Fortified wine is regular wine with a shot of strong spirit poured in, and the timing of that pour changes everything. Add grape brandy partway through fermentation, while sugar is still in the juice, and the alcohol kills the yeast on contact. The wine stops fermenting and stays sweet, while the added spirit pushes it up to around 20% alcohol, far stronger than a normal glass. That's port, the deep, sweet red from Portugal's steep Douro Valley. Sherry from Spain is fortified after fermentation finishes, so it lands drier. The spirit does double duty. It sweetens or strengthens the wine, and it acts as a preservative, which is the whole reason the style exists. Port was born out of a trade war. In the 1600s, England kept falling out with France and cutting off its wine, so English merchants sailed to Portugal, their oldest ally, hunting for a replacement. The rugged reds they found in the Douro didn't survive the long sea voyage home, so they dosed the barrels with brandy to keep the wine alive at sea. The 1703 Methuen Treaty then slashed the tax on Portuguese wine in Britain, and demand exploded. By 1756, the Douro became one of the first wine regions in the world to have its boundaries mapped and protected by law. A rulebook drawn up to guard the wine the English had grown addicted to: dessert wine. The greatest sweet wines in the world are made from grapes attacked by a fungus. It's called noble rot, Botrytis cinerea, and it eats tiny holes in the grape skin, letting water evaporate until the fruit shrivels to a raisin. What's left behind is concentrated. Less water, but the same sugar, acid, and flavor packed into a smaller berry. Press those wrinkled grapes, and the juice is thick, syrupy, and intense. This is how Sauternes, France's legendary golden dessert wine, is made. But the exact same fungus in wet weather just rots the crop and destroys it. The line between a ruined harvest and liquid gold is nothing more than the weather turning dry at the right moment. Because the rot shrivels the fruit, there's barely any juice left. A single vine might yield just 1 to 3 glasses of finished wine, and pickers have to go through the vineyard by hand, again and again, taking only the shriveled grapes. There's a second route to the same sweetness that skips the fungus entirely: ice wine. Grapes are left on the vine deep into winter until a hard freeze locks the water inside each berry into ice. They're pressed while still frozen, so the ice stays behind and only the sweet, unfrozen syrup runs out. Germany made the first ice wine by accident in 1829, when growers left grapes hanging as animal feed and discovered the frozen fruit gave a startlingly sweet juice.